everyone, this is DKeys, bringing you an updated Scepter Hammer Elementalist build guide following the June 2015 patch that not only updated Lion's Arch, but also introduced the specialization system, which replaced the trait system that we're all familiar with. Instead of having 5 trait lines, in which we choose 7 major traits, we have 3 trait lines that we choose from those 5 trait lines now. So we have 9 choices to make instead of just 7. This doesn't really change the core of the Scepter Hammer Elementalist, but it does open up a couple of interesting build options. For the Scepter Dagger Elementalist, in Fire, I would recommend, Empowering Flame gives 150 power while in Fire Attunement, and might be possibly bugged to give 150 extra power. Then at the first level, I would recommend Burning Precision for a supplement to Scepter Dagger's pretty low burning uptime. This also increases the duration of any burning that they apply normally. Next, Sunspot grants the Elementalist a fire aura for a few seconds when attuning to fire, and also deals a little bit of damage while attuning to fire. Next, Pyromancer's Training reduces the cooldown on all those useful fire skills, as well as increases damage while in fire attunement. So if you happen to not be in the proper attunement, but are stuck in fire for something, it's not as bad. Then, Burning Rage deals more damage to burning foes. That 10% damage modifier has not changed with this patch. Finally, Persisting Flames gives 10 seconds of Fury when using a blast finisher in any fire field, not necessarily your own, and increases the duration of your own fire fields by 2 seconds. That part has not changed. What has been added to this trait in this patch is the Lava Font when downed. Now this Lava Font lasts for 10 seconds and hits pretty hard, so this will really increase your chances of rallying if you get downed in a group of mobs. In Air, Zephyr's Speed increases your movement speed by 25% instead of just 10%. So now, instead of fumbling for that signet of air between battles, you can just swap to air attunement. Ferocious Winds grants you 7% of your base and equipment precision as ferocity for a little bit of a buff. And Electric Discharge has not changed at all, dealing a little bit of damage to your target when you swap to air attunement. So this is only good for single targets. Finally, I would recommend Tempest Defense if you happen to be using Frostbow for that disable, or Inscription for reduced cooldowns on that Glyph of Storms. Weak Spot has not changed at all again in the airline, and grants a 60% chance on critical hits to apply 5 seconds of vulnerability with no internal cooldown. Bolt to the Heart was moved from the Adept to this last tier, so that it is now a 20% damage modifier when your foe is at 50% health or lower. This is in line with Thief and Necromancer traits, so this is an appropriate spot for this. Finally, I would recommend Water as your last line as a Scepter Hammer Elementalist. Soothing Mist, Healing Ripple, and Aquatic Benevolence will help you and your party maintain your Scholar's buff. Meanwhile, Piercing Shards, which is pretty core to this build, is a 20% damage increase to vulnerable foes, which synergizes very well with that Weak Spot. And also, it increases the duration of that vulnerability by 33%. So even if no one else in your party were applying Vuln, you'd have pretty decent vulnerability uptime by yourself, though it wouldn't be a lot. Next, Aquamancer's Training gives you a Scholar's type bonus, that 10% when you're over 90% health, and also reduces the cooldown on your water weapon skills. This gives you access to a very low cooldown heal especially when Scepter Dagger, but it also means that between this and Piercing Shards, you'll be camping Water Attunement if you happen to not have a Conjure, because Shatterstone is great at applying vulnerability. Finally, at your last choice, I would recommend Powerful Aura if you happen to be running Scepter Focus, or if you happen to be leaping through a lot of fire fields, or Cleansing Water, simply because Water Trident applies a little bit of regen on a 13-second cooldown, so you could count this as one extra Condi cleanse every 13 seconds. That is, if you happen to have Cleansing Water. Now, if you happen to be using a Focus as your offhand, I would instead swap Burning Precision for Conjure, so that your Lightning Hammer has 25 charges. I noticed when formulating rotations that 15 charges happens to be great for Scepter Dagger rotations, but you really want those extra few Lightning Hammer auto attacks for Scepter Focus rotations so that your other blast finishers are up. This is about the only change between Scepter Dagger and Scepter Focus that you need to make. Both rotations are pretty similar in DPS. Scepter Focus is a little bit more beginner friendly, while Scepter Dagger has a little bit more damage. But on top of that, Scepter Focus gives you access to very defensive skills such as Swirling Winds for that projectile block, and Obsidian Flesh and Magnetic Wave. For gear for both builds, I would recommend Berserkers and Assassins Mixed Armor, and full Berserkers Trinkets and Berserkers Weapons, or full Berserkers Armor with an Assassin's Trinket, which you receive from completing a collection from either the CM or Ara dungeons, and collections from the weapon vendors. In general, I would recommend Superior Runes of the Scholar, just for that increased damage. Though, if you happen for some reason to not be running with a Phalanx Strength Warrior, which should be the meta now because their damage is actually decent, you could use a set of Runes of Strength. Scepter Hammer builds maintain at least 9 might and can burst up to 12 to even 18 might, 12 for Scepter Dagger and 18 for Scepter Focus. So that extra might that you would get from the Runes of Strength is not lost, but it's often unnecessarily in decent party comps. For weapons, I would recommend a Sigil of Night and a Sigil of Force for daytime dungeons, or for nighttime dungeons, and a Sigil of Force and a Sigil of either Air or Frailty, or even another Slaying Sigil for nighttime dungeons. For difficult battles, you can use a Sigil of Energy for that extra dodge when you swap attunements, because Vigor was nerfed, but I often find with these kinds of rotations that Sigil of Energy sometimes procs when you don't really need it. Also, if you happen to be using Scepter Focus, I'd recommend making your Focus just an exotic weapon if you're strapped for resources, because not a lot of your damage comes from that Focus, and your Conjures will use a weapon strength based on the rarity that is highest on your weapons. So since a lot of your damage comes from your Scepter and not your Focus, you want your Scepter to be ascended, and your Focus can be exotic if you don't really need that extra little bit of damage. For weapon skills, Dragon's Tooth and Phoenix are blast finishers on a relatively low cooldown, and Flame Wall on your Focus is a fire field, as well as Ring of Fire on your dagger. the last skill on your dagger, Fire Grab, is very damaging, and so I would prioritize that over using your Lightning Hammer. And on your focus, Fire Shield is a fire aura that is on a relatively low cooldown. I believe this cooldown was adjusted with this most recent patch. In water, for both Scepter Dagger and Scepter Focus, you'll want to use Ice Shards with Shatterstone off cooldown if you happen to not have a Conjure. Shatterstone does a decent amount of damage and stacks a lot of vulnerability. And Ice Shards is a little bit better to use now that Piercing Shards, the specialization trait, is back in the meta. Water Trident is a heal and regen on a 13-second cooldown, which pairs very well with that Cleansing Water trait. On focus, Freezing Gust causes chill, and Comet is a blast finisher. On dagger, Frost Aura is another aura that you can use with the other water trait that doesn't remove conditions. And Cleansing Wave is another heal that does not produce regen.
Combat ready!
In Air Attunement, Arc Lightning is a very long channel auto attack that, if you happen to be stuck in Air Attunement, should be supplemented with damage from Lightning Strike. Blinding Flash is blind on demand on a relatively low cooldown. Then on Offhand Dagger, Red Lightning is a great little burst of damage and a great gap closer. And Updraft is a launch to reduce the amount of Defiance on a boss and grants a little bit of swiftness. On Focus, Swirling Winds blocks projectiles in a very large radius around you. And Gale also can remove a stack of Defiance on a boss. Finally, in Earth, Stone Shards can be used if you happen to be stuck in Earth Attunement. Rock Barrier will increase your toughness, and Dust Devil will blind a foe. But really, you don't want to be stuck in Earth Attunement all that long other than to use blast finishers or defensive skills. On Focus, Magnetic Wave will reflect projectiles for a few seconds after you use it, and is a blast finisher. And Obsidian Flesh is a 4-second invulnerability. On Dagger, both Earthquake and Churning Earth are blast finishers, though Churning Earth has a ridiculously long cast time, and I would not recommend using it in battle because it roots you. Earthquake is a little bit more user-friendly, but has a very long cooldown. For your heal, I would mainly recommend Arcane Brilliance for that additional blast finisher, and for a decent heal while in melee with a target. Though if you need additional condition removal, Ether Renewal is not a bad choice. For the most part, your utilities will be Conjure Lightning Hammer, Glyph of Storms, mainly to use in Air Attunement for a very good amount of damage and very good vulnerability, and Conjure Frostbow for very good burst. On Frostbow, I would recommend opening up with Deep Freeze for a 5-second disable on your target. Then follow that up with Ice Storm for very good damage in an AoE, especially on large targets. Then follow it up with Frostfan, and finally possibly follow it up with Frost Volley after that. Its damage is now pretty competitive with other options, and stacks a lot of very long-lasting vulnerability. For your elite, Conjure Fiery Greatsword is a great choice for running and also for opening battle, though Glyph of Elementals also has its uses. The Earth Elemental can grab aggro very easily, and is pretty hard to kill, as the description states, while Ice Elemental can also grab aggro to a lesser extent, will heal you and nearby enemies, or allies, and can help CC enemies and keep them less able to attack. Otherwise, the Fire Elemental is decent for AoE damage. Finally, Tornado can grant stability if you don't want to use Armor of Earth, and is very good at CCing enemies that don't gain Defiance if you have to CC them. For Conjure Fiery Greatsword, it can be used as a battle opener, especially if you're using it for running beforehand. And then I would use a Firestorm while out, and then close the gap with Fiery Rush. Now that ANET actually buffed the final strike of Fiery Rush, it's not that bad to use, but I still wouldn't recommend putting it into your rotation. Finally, if it won't bring you out of melee, use Fiery Whirl. And then you maintain your rotation, usually starting in Fire Attunement if Scepter Focus, or even possibly Air Attunement if Scepter Dagger, and if you want to get started with your Glyph of Storms. For food, I would recommend Truffle Steak for the most part for Scepter Hammer builds, though using asparagus and sage, salad, seaweed salad, or experimental remnants are not bad ideas because you often have a lot of mobility with the Scepter Hammer. Candy Dragon Rolls can be another good option, though Scepter Hammer builds don't often have as many hits per second as Staff or Dagger Focus, so it's not as strong with Scepter Hammer as it is with those builds. For super casual dungeon runs or for open world, the Birthday Blaster is not a bad idea either. Elementalists have enough condition damage in their rotation that they benefit from the 40 power, precision, ferocity, and condition damage that the Birthday Blaster grants. And of course, the extra karma isn't bad either in open world. For utility consumables, I'd recommend potions of the appropriate slaying type, so make sure you keep plenty on hand. And if you don't have a slaying potion, Scale Venom is acceptable for that additional vulnerability and weakness. Another option would be Sharpening Stones for that increased power. Otherwise, just keep other items on you that you find useful for dungeoning. If you're having trouble surviving as a Scepter Hammer Elementalist, you can adjust some of your utility skills for survivability. As I mentioned before, you can change Arcane Brilliance for Ether Renewal. Now, Lightning Hammer you can't really go without, and a lot of pugs will expect that Frostbow, though Glyph of Storms is actually probably a safer DPS increase. For defensive purposes, Arcane Shield is not bad at all for these Conjure Heavy builds, because Mist Form, while it is a better invulnerability, will cause you to lose that Conjure. You could also possibly use Lightning Flash just to better reposition yourself if you're using a Frostbow. Other options are Glyph of Elemental Power to keep up a chill, weakness, or cripple on an enemy so that they don't hit as much, or if they do hit, they don't hit as hard. Also, there's Armor of Earth for the protection and stability, but its cooldown is rather long. Finally, you may find some niche uses for Conjure Earth Shield with its Invuln and AoE Pull, as well as Glyph of Renewal, and some of the Signets. Of the two Scepter Hammer rotations, Scepter Dagger is a little bit stronger, but you work hard for that extra DPS. Start in Air Attunement for Lightning Strike, Ride the Lightning, and Glyph of Storms, then swap to Fire for your Fire Field and Blast finishers. Then swap to Water and Conjure Frostbow if using it, and then Conjure Lightning Hammer after you use your Frostbow. Auto attack with the Lightning Hammer for 4 chains, then at the start of your 5th chain, swap to Air Attunement so that Water Attunement can start recharging. At the end of your 5th auto attack chain, drop the Lightning Hammer so that you don't waste the Ghost Charge, and use Lightning Strike and Ride the Lightning again. Then swap to Fire Attunement to repeat this process of Fire Field, Blast finishers, and using that Lightning Hammer. After about 40 seconds with this rotation, the DPS really drops off because you're out of Lightning Hammer charges, and the cooldown on Lightning Hammer is not up yet. If that's the case, swap to fire and put down fire field and blast finishers, then swap to earth for the additional blast finishers. Once you use both churning earth and earthquake in earth, swap to water and auto attack and use Shatterstone until your lightning hammer is just about off cooldown. Then swap to air for Glyph of Storms and lightning strike and ride the lightning again, then fire for the fire field and blast finishers. The Scepter focus hammer rotation is a little bit easier to pull off and is infinitely repeatable, but is slightly lower DPS to make up for that. Though it's still a better choice for battles that are over 40 seconds, just because you don't have that period of downtime like you do with the Scepter Dagger. Start Fire Attunement and cast Dragon's Tooth, Flame Wall, and Phoenix for that fire field and 2 blast finishers. Then swap to Earth Attunement for Arcane Brilliance and Magnetic Wave for 2 more blast finishers. Then finally swap to Air for Glyph of Storms, supplemented with a Lightning Strike. Finally, swap to Water Attunement, cast Comet for that one last blast finisher, and conjure your Lightning Hammer, and then auto attack with Lightning Hammer.
Energized.
Complete 6 full chains of the Lightning Hammer auto attack, and then swap to Fire to prepare for Water Attunement being off cooldown when you want it the most. Complete 2 more auto attack chains, and then drop the Conjure so that you don't use the Phantom Charge or any low power auto attacks. Then cast Dragon's Tooth, Flame Wall, and Phoenix again, and then swap to Earth for 2 more blast finishers. Then pick up your Conjure as you're swapping to a Water Attunement, and use the Lightning Hammer auto attack 6 times again for 6 full chains. Then swap to Fire to prepare to repeat this. Both of these iterations for the Lightning Hammers should allow you to stack 18 might in battle, so this is very powerful if you don't have a Phalanx Strength warrior in your party. However, if you're planning on using Glyph of Storms and Frostbow to burst enemies down, I would highly recommend just pre-stacking might, and then going in air attunement for that Glyph of Storms, then swapping to water as you conjure your Frostbow. A lot of enemies in dungeons won't really survive a full party with Frostbows and a couple of Glyph of Storms to stack that vulnerability if that party starts off at 25 might. However, for longer battles, you may need to use a Lightning Hammer to keep that might up and to keep your damage up if you choose not to use a staff. With only 2 rotations to memorize, and the reliance on Frostbow for many fights, Scepter Hammer Elementalist has gotten a little bit easier to play, and I hope you enjoy it.